Hi, I'm Dave Gwynn. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about security, one of everyone's favorite topics. I'm going to focus but in my experience, it's one slide that has sort of several facets to it. A, people are afraid to give it. Security in general as a topic is something that scares people. They're not real comfortable with giving this slide. B, the people that are on the receiving end of the security pitch sometimes tune out and get overwhelmed by the acronyms and can't really differentiate between what we as Nutanix tell them and maybe what another vendor tells them 2 hours later. And C, it's something that's absolutely critical and it's a huge differentiator something that really distances us from the pack. So I just want to spend a couple minutes and try to make people more comfortable with it and talk about how I give this slide. The first thing I'll say about it is that I take this from a completely different approach, and I take an anecdotal approach to it rather than just rattling off a bunch of acronyms and hoping that the people understand what I'm talking about. So let me give you the story that I tell. To tell this story, you'll be in good shape, and it'll also be something in the audience to remember that's different about Nutanix. So here's the story. Back in 2011, early 2012, one of our earliest customers was an entity called the Army Intelligence School, which is a school at a place called Fort Huachuca in Arizona. They train Army intelligence analysts, and obviously the data that they have on their network is highly classified, highly sensitive, and nothing that can be left unsecured. They were looking at Nutanix. They were very interested in using us for VDI, and we went in there and started talking to them back then about Nutanix, and obviously they started asking about our security and how locked down the environment was. Well, for us, as a very young company at the time, it was really a fork in the road. It was a decision point for us where we had to decide, are we going to embrace these DoD security requirements and put a lot of investment into getting the certifications they were asking for, or are we going to say, you know what, sorry, we'll come back to you later when we have this, but for now we've got to focus on the commercial world. Well, we sat down and we talked about that and came up with the let's head down the path and get these certs. And that's really what we did. But what that meant from us over the long term, now here many years later, is that we have in our very genetics and at a pedigree level security built into our products. And from the time that we were the earliest phases of our code base, we've been building in certifications that the DoD looks for. A lot of the other folks in the commercial world who are looking for similar security. So there were a lot of different things they asked for, and if you look at this slide, you can look at it as sort of four corners to this slide. In the lower left are the certifications, and this is where I say, you know, if you rattle off, we have NIST, or we have FIPS 140, or we have this and that, you're going to lose your audience, and maybe you won't feel that comfortable giving it. So you don't necessarily have to know all that. Most importantly, just say we have all of the DoD certifications that enable us to run on the highest classification levels that the DoD requires. That summarizes a whole bunch of different security aspects that we have, but you don't have to get into the nitty-gritty. It answers at pretty high level. Second, focus on something called a STIG. One of the first things we had to do for the Army Intel School is establish something called a STIG. That's the Security Technical Implementation Guide. If you've heard of a hardening guide, a STIG is just sort of another name for that, where you come up with, here are the things that we have to do in order to lock down our product. And a STIG is really just a set of instructions, just like setting up a swing set in your backyard with a bunch of tools. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do that. Step 3, do that. And sometimes, you know, when you do that, at the end you end up with 5 parts still sitting in the grass and you don't know where they were supposed to be put in, and you're not quite sure if that swing set is going to be perfect. Same thing with a STIG. It's a human process that says step 1 do this, step 2 do that, and by the time you get to step 74, hopefully you did it right and hopefully your environment is locked down. But if you really want to take a STIG to another level, there's a couple things that you can do, and we've done those things. What did we do? We took this manual process, and first we went and got it certified by an agency called DISA. DISA is the Defense Information Systems Agency. They'll take your hardening guide, your STIG, and they will bless it. They will test it and say, yes, if you follow these steps in perfect order and you implement all of them, you do indeed have something that's locked down. Second, in our case, what we did is we automated that STIG. We said we're going to take this to a new level. We're going to make machine-readable version of our STIG so that instead of a person having to do these manual steps, they can just click on a button and say, run it, lock down my environment. And so when we do that, we automate it, we take away that human error-prone aspect of it, and we wind up with something that's guaranteed to be locked down. But third, what we did is we said, you know what, it's cool that we can lock it down in a moment in time. But what if we were to take that and build it in so that it runs automatically on a timed basis so that A, you can lock it down in a moment, but B, it'll run periodically so that you don't have one moment where everything's great, but it only gets worse from there. What you're doing is re-establishing your security environment over and over and over again by having this run in case anybody accidentally leaves a gate open. So if you look up into the upper right corner of the slide, that's what this talks about, automated validation and self-healing. We automate it and we go back and rerun constantly to do self-healing. Lower left, those are your certifications, all of the DoD certifications. Upper left, where we talk about the full stack and the security development lifecycle, these are the phases that our engineering group follows. Our actual product development guys at headquarters are building our code, writing our code, checking it into systems as they're coding during the pre-release phases of our products to make sure that the certifications are all followed in those phases. That means that even before our products go into QA, we've been following the DoD certified and we're staying within the guardrails, the guidelines that the DoD requires of us. So that's very different if you compare us to a product that's been new to market, that A, doesn't have the automated STIGs, that B, doesn't run them routinely, that C, doesn't do it at the core and pedigree of their product, and that D, doesn't do it during the development stage. Instead, they bolt it on after the fact. Bolting it on after the fact means that you're relying on your customers to lock things down. You're relying on your customers to QA things. And a lot of times when that happens out in the field, they're the ones that call for support. And when support finds out that they're operating in lockdown mode, they can the whole, they say, hey, undo your security and let's try to troubleshoot it with security turned off. We QA in a different environment where we're fully locked down. The lower right talks about our ecosystem. That's our alliance partners who are all in the business of those 6 categories. So when it comes to firewalls and malware and antivirus, the way we accomplish that is through our partner and ecosystem, all of whom have industry-leading products that do those facets. Last thing to touch on, and this is a very important thing to talk about, is vulnerability scanners. The way that you prove that you actually have all these things is by running vulnerability scanners. So get to know 2 things. 1, Retina, and 2, Nessus. Nessus is spelled N-E-S-S-U-S. We use both of those vulnerability scanners in-house at headquarters to test our stuff and make sure that we're fully locked down and we have 0 vulnerabilities when things go out in the field. If you're talking to a prospect who's very security focused, encourage them to run those vulnerability scanners on our product as well as the competitor's product. Almost guaranteed that all these guys that are new to the hyper-converged market are going to trip over that. If you run vulnerability scans on these new products, the first thing they've thrown onto the cutting room floor is security, and those vulnerability scanners will find category 1 vulnerabilities that they can't deal with. If you tell this slide using that method, you'll leave a memorable story, and all those acronyms won't trip you up, nor will they trip up your audience. Good luck.